In the wake of the Bondi Beach Hanukkah massacre, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called on world leaders to combat anti Semitism in their countries. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese claimed he's been doing just that. But Jews aren't buying it. This and more on Israel Undiplomatic. Hanukkah is a time of light, hope, and miracles, big and small. This year, you have a chance to bring a little miracle into your own life. We're excited to share the Dream Raffle, where you can win a fully furnished luxury apartment in Israel. Yes, an actual home of your own. Find the link in the description below and use the special code GELT, that's G-E-L-T, capital letters, to get 8% off the entire order. And if you purchase your tickets by December 22nd, you'll also be entered into our bonus raffle for a $15,000 cash prize. Buy your tickets today.
Shalom and welcome to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic. I'm Mark Regev, and as per usual, I'm here with my co-host, Ruthie Bloom.
Hello. I'm sorry it's under these circumstances today, Mark. Everybody knows that your background is as an Australian. I mean, you moved to Israel decades ago, and you also served as ambassador to the UK. But you grew up in Australia, and you still have siblings and extended family there and friends. And given the horrors this week at Bondi Beach, I was wondering if does it seem to you that this was predictable?
I'm not sure predictable, but it doesn't come as a total surprise. And the strange thing that me and many other Australians who live in Israel discovered this week is we're used to getting phone calls or WhatsApp messages from down under, from Australia, and they, after missiles have fallen from Iran or after there's a terrible terrorist attack or whatever, and expressing concern. And this time the foot was on the other shoe or the shoe was on the other foot. That we were ringing them and asking them how they were. And, checking, do any of our loved specific family was hit, or do we know the people who were killed, and so forth and so on. Very difficult time for Australian Jews. And I think our audience needs to know the following thing about Australian Jews. I mean, of course, Australian Jews can, count their history back to the very beginning of Australia, but the overwhelming majority of Australian Jews today are the descendants of what they call the post-war immigration wave, which is basically Holocaust survivors, like my father, who at the end of the Second World War wanted to get out of Europe, because for them Europe was one big graveyard. Europe was the place where their families had been murdered, where their communities had been decimated, where there was no home to go back to. And Australia was the furthest place away conceivable from Europe. It was a new country, and they thought, they could leave the horrors of Europe behind and move to a new country and start a new life. I remember I went to the Jewish school in Australia, the Jewish day school in Melbourne, and many of my friends had a parent, sometimes two parents, with numbered tattoos from the concentration camps, and it wasn't something abnormal. It was part of the reality we grew up in. And this whole idea that Australia was something different, it was a free country, a tolerant country, a country where people could contribute and succeed. And this Australia that we saw at Bondi Beach is something very different. Not the Australia that I remember, that I grew up in. Of course, there was always, anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic snobbery here or there, or some sort of prejudice, but it didn't affect you. This is big. This is a change. And when I speak to people in Australia, or when I hear them being interviewed, they say, we're shocked, but we're not surprised. And it's been very difficult for Australian Jews. On one hand, you've got neo-Nazis. Maybe they've always been there, but they've come out of the woodwork more recently and are more prolific. They're more out there. They're more vocal. And you've also got radical leftists who are Palestine from the river to the sea. And then you've got a situation where you've got now, with a larger Muslim community, you've got Islamic anti-Semitism, Islamist, I should say, anti-Semitism. as we saw the perpetrators of the murders were. And it's a difficult time for Australian Jews. I'd add one more thing. When I was the ambassador to Britain, and there were threats on the Jewish community in the United Kingdom, the British government was, very strong in supporting the security and safety of British Jews, and British Jews would always express their praise for what the British government was doing to support the community and to make sure it was well protected from possible threats. My impression is that's not the situation in Australia with Australian Jews. That they were dismissed by many in authority as, like, there's an Australian word, I don't think it's an American word, they whinging, complaining, that they were, saying things, and, they were crybabies, so to speak, saying this sort of thing can happen. Well, guess what, Ruthie? It happened.
First of all, I'd like to say that the UK that is no longer safe for Jews either. The Jews I know in the UK say it's a disaster from that point of view. And let me say that you're right. Australia, those Holocaust survivors were right. Australia it was a new frontier. It was a welcoming place, just like the United States. And as you said, the United States also had anti-Semitism, but basically Jews could flourish and did, and got into the highest positions, etc., and practiced any strain of Judaism in public, in private, whatever. There was no problem. And I take issue with you pointing to neo-Nazis, okay? Because that is exactly what Prime Minister Albanese was trying to do in the wake of this massacre. There's anti-Semites on both sides. There's the far right and there's the far left. No, this issue right now is an issue of jihad, global jihad. We've seen, and in Australia, one of the ways that we could see it really in living color, so to speak, is that on October 8th, the day after the October 7th massacre that Hamas committed against innocent Israelis, the day after, before the IDF even entered Gaza to retaliate or to rescue the hostages, Australians marched in thousands, screaming, "Gas the Jews." Not Israelis, gas the Jews. And then, since then, we have seen synagogues defaced, car bombs, I don't know, all over Australia, mainly Melbourne and Sydney, where I assume that's where most of the Jews live in Australia. And all that time, Albanese was saying, yes, we must combat. We don't accept. These people are trying to, sow havoc on society. No, these people are trying to slaughter Jews. And he won't say it. And even when he says it, he right away says, this is terrible. This is, it reminds me of the Oslo years when people said that Palestinian terrorism was, it's extremism on both sides. It's enemies of peace. No. These are not enemies of peace. These are enemies of the West, what we saw on Bondi Beach. First and foremost, you kill the Jews, you kill Christians, you kill Westerners, but this was specifically Jewish. It was a Hanukkah party, and we have to stop cloaking it in other language. The other thing that Albanese did, which was disgusting. I mean, I'm at my wit's end with him. And that is, he said, he and all the leftists who support him, or even if they don't support him, their first response was, we need stricter gun control laws. As though, first of all, Australia already has strict gun control laws. Number two, the shooters, the father and son jihadists, the father had a licensed weapon. That's number two. Number three, guns don't kill people. People kill people. And having stricter gun laws does not prevent a radical ideology from spreading. And my last point is this. A lot has been made about the fact that ISIS flags were found in the car of these guys, and explosives and all kinds of things. And even President Trump mentioned ISIS. There's a lot of talk about that. And I would just like to say, yeah, ISIS. Is that You know what? There are Sunnis, there are Shiites, there's ISIS, there's Hezbollah, there's Hamas, there's Iran. You know, Iran and ISIS were not on the same page. But let me tell you, where global jihad is concerned, all of these vile specimens are in the same camp. And so I don't care that they're ISIS or whatever they are. What they are, they're global jihadists. They're jihadists with a mission. It was well planned, and they succeeded. And another thing, the Australian police, it took them 10 minutes before they were standing there. People were filming this stuff, and only the heroic actions of the civilians, people at the festival, actually helped the police apprehend the suspects. And here again, I have one more point, and that is the hero who grabbed one of the terrorists from behind is a Muslim himself, a fruit stand owner. And I have to say, first of all, everyone is praising him as a hero, and he is a hero, and he is a Muslim, but he's not an Islamist. And Jews all over Australia and elsewhere, I imagine, have already raised well more than $1 million to give him as a reward and to help him, because he was shot in the leg and in the arm. He's hospitalized, and he's not a rich guy. Now, why is that important? Right away, Jews went to embrace him and thank him for doing that. And that is the difference between the Jews and the Islamists.
So I want to respond to a few things that you've said. And I don't agree with everything. But I want to say the following. On the issue of the hero, the Syrian man who had the fruit stand or a grocery shop, something in I don't know the details. But I think he's very important. Why? Because if I'm a young Muslim growing up in Australia today, right, I've got a role model, right? I've got someone who speaks for me, who stands for good values. And I think that's a good thing. I mean, think of it if the only role model was the jihadists who were killing people, right? You've got a positive role model there, and I think it's right that he be raised on a pedestal. He deserves. And there's no doubt that he saved lives, because he took on, without a weapon, he took on one of the shooters and prevented him from continuing to shoot, which saved lives. I also think, as much as you are critical of gun control, I want to say the fact that in Australia it's very difficult to have automatic weapons. It's much easier to have an automatic weapon in the United States, yes? I think that maybe, to a certain extent, limited the carnage that we saw at Bondi Beach. If you know anything about guns, they had to, it was a bolt rifle, and they had to each time take a second between each shot. And so I think the fact that there are gun control laws in Australia did limit the scope of the killing. Maybe it could have been much more than 15. Having said that, when the Australian government went to its natural position is let's tighten up the gun control laws. So I'm not against, there's a whole question. This man had a license for his guns, and at the same time he had a son who was a suspect by the ASIO, that's the Australian FBI, Australian CIA, that his son was under investigation for connections with ISIS. So how did he get it? So there's obviously a screw up there. How did they get the gun license, right? But let's stop there but say what needs to be said. The former Prime Minister of Australia, from the other side of the aisle, from the Conservative side of the aisle, in Australia it's called the Liberal Party, John Howard, former Prime Minister, friend of Israel, said, yes, we can discuss gun laws, but we can't divert that from the major topic, which is the growth of anti-Semitism, the mainstreaming of anti-Semitism. And I was thinking, what could I say this morning? Because what does it mean that you've got a Jewish community in Australia that says they're feeling increasing, and especially over the last 2 years, growing anti-Semitism, growing hatred in Australia, hatred manifested in, anti-Semitic graffiti, in firebombs, in vandalism, in bullying on social media, and all these things, and now finally in murder, outright murder. And so what is the responsibility of the Australian government in not combating this? And I think there is huge responsibility. And I was thinking of my past. When I was a schoolboy, I had this, which is Chairman Mao Zedong's Little Red Book, which I was looking at this morning, and I'll tell you why in a while. It's a bit like a Siddur, a Jewish prayer book, the way it's put together, and it's got a little string here for me to know my place so I don't lose my page, yes? But I wanted to quote Chairman Mao, and it's a quote from his book. He's got on, a book on guerrilla war, and he says, "The guerrilla fighter, Mao Zedong, the guerrilla fighter moves among the people as a fish moves in the ocean." It's very easy to dismiss and say these are two people from ISIS, and they could have been two neo-Nazis, they could have been two anything, and then you just dismiss them as a bad apple in a very big box, right? That's the easy way out. Now, of course, you have to fight the extremist groups. You've got to fight ISIS. You've got to fight neo-Nazis. You've got to fight Hezbollah. You've got to fight Hamas. You've got to fight all these people in their organized groups. But if they feel that they are fish swimming in a friendly sea, that gives them legitimacy, that gives them power, that gives them an understanding that the people are behind them. And here, the question of, was there a public atmosphere in Australia which said Israel genocide, Israel apartheid, Israel evil, Israelis evil, Jews evil, that contributes to this sort of situation and creates oxygen, or to quote Mao Zedong, creates the sea for these fish to swim.
Absolutely. But you understand, first of all, again, I take issue. The reason you shouldn't lump neo-Nazis in with that list is not because they're any better or they're any less anti-Semitic, but because the left and the liberals all acknowledge that Nazis are bad and neo-Nazis are bad. They don't acknowledge that jihadists are bad. They say, no, it's on behalf of the Palestinians, and Albanese recognized the Palestinian state, claiming it's all because, it's all equal. It's not equal, Mark. Neo-Nazis are the bad guys in the eyes of the media and the politicians and all that, and all the liberals. It's the jihadists that you have to go after, because Albanese would never support neo-Nazis, but he's an apologist for jihadists. And how do we know that? Because in the middle of the assault on Israel, the Gaza war, which was the Hamas assault on Israel, basically Iran's assault through proxies on Israel, a 7-front war, he was concerned about the Palestinians and Palestinian statehood. And he claims now that we are combating anti-Semitism. Really? Do you know that Netanyahu warned him? He sent him a letter. The Mossad warned Canberra that there are Iranian cells operating and fomenting terrorism in Australia. They were ignored by Albanese, and every time he says, yes, it's terrible, and yes, we are combating it. Really? No, you're not. You're encouraging it. You said the atmosphere. You're absolutely right that there is that atmosphere. When you have marches like that, and from the very first moment that there were parades saying gas the Jews in Australia, of all places, well, then there should have been a total outcry on the part of everybody, but there wasn't. And you know why? Because they used Israel as the excuse to attack Jews. And it's a lie. It's an excuse. We know that. But it helped. And the fact that Australia would side with any kind of, or even give thought to, the International Criminal Court's decisions is appalling. Australia, like the United States, I say this about the United States too. You have two countries that are very welcoming, not only of Jews, but of immigrants. Well, this kind of immigration is destroying the West. Jewish immigration to Australia or to America did not do it. Legal immigration to these countries did not do it. It's this mass allowing anybody to come in to these countries, and they're destroying them from within. And by the way, anti-Semitism, as you know, from the Nazis, anywhere that anti-Semitism takes hold and spreads is a society in decline.
It's no accident that anti-Semitism has been called the oldest hatred, because it really does go back to even pre-Christian times. Obviously, there were times when the organized Christian church was openly anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish. We were the terrible Christ killers, the murderers of the Son of God. And throughout the Middle Ages, you had all sorts of claims made against the Jews that we were supposedly spreading the plague, or we were killing young Christian boys for blood for our matzah, for Passover, for Pesach. All sorts of things Jews were accused of. And in the Muslim world, Jews were legally a second-class citizen. Yes, in traditional Islam, Jews were dhimmi status, which means second-class citizens, may be tolerated, but only a little bit, and depending on the period and depending on the country. And the interesting thing about anti-Semitism is its staying power, its ability to be relevant and to be there in different countries in different times over history. And so you have racial anti-Semitism of the Nazis, right? And which is supposed to be the whole term anti-Semitism. We're supposed to give it Jew hatred a sort of a scientific name. Wilhelm Marr invents it in the 19th century when he talks about, the Jews' race as it's foreign to us, it's hostile to us, and so forth. And today you have this crazy situation, and it's not just in Australia, it's across the West, where you have the old-fashioned, and I don't dismiss it. You shouldn't dismiss it, because a neo-Nazi can get a gun and shoot people too. We saw that in Pittsburgh, right? There is what we saw in Australia and in Britain on Yom Kippur, with the Islamist extremists, and then you've got far leftists who, if for the far right, all the Jews are Trotsky. So for the far left, all the Jews are Rothschild. We're all rich, imperialist, capitalist exploiters of the poor working people. In this case, we're exploiting the poor Palestinians and so forth and so on. In fact, it's actually interesting, because for the radical left, the Jews are finally white. Because for years, the Jews were never considered white. We weren't invited to join the country clubs. We were killed and massacred in Europe because we weren't considered European. Now we're considered white by the radical left because being white's not a good thing.
No, absolutely. Listen, we know throughout history, Jews were hated for being successful or not being successful. They were hated for assimilating or not assimilating. Name it. And now the state of Israel has opened up a whole new can of worms, because the criticism of Israel, so-called, legitimized the latent anti-Semitism that was kind of taboo in the aftermath of World War II. I mean, gassing to death 6 million Jews will do that, all right? So people, they thought what they thought and they felt what they felt, but it was not done in polite society. And the state of Israel, that once it became, the Goliath, well, actually, that's the David and Goliath. David actually beats Goliath, so we should change that metaphor. But when Israel turned into a power, I mean, it became a state and had an army and was successful, it became fair game, and it enabled anti-Semites who might have kept their mouths shut for a while. It gave them a whole new realm in which they could function, because now they could say, you see, Israel is bad because it kills Arabs. Not that Israel defends itself against surrounding enemies, but rather it's the big bad wolf. So again, I have to say, it's true that the far right and the far left do meet. That's for sure. But again, the difference is it's the left that has most of the media, most of the newspapers, television stations. It has most of the academics, actors, Hollywood. It has all the beautiful people and all the vociferous people. So they're the ones that support jihad, even when they don't, even when they deny supporting it. They understand globalize the intifada from the river to the sea, as you pointed out. Now, the fact that on January 1st, the mayor of New York City, the most Jewish city in the world, is going to be Zoran Mamdani, who's appointing a whole slew of people around him who are outright jihadists. So the fact that he comes out and says, "Oh, this is terrible what happened on Bondi Beach, and we will protect our Jews." Baloney. And you know how he talks about we'll protect our Jews? It's a little bit like you talk about your pets or something. I'm sorry. We cannot tolerate this. And Albanese, by the way, what he should be doing is resigning in disgrace after this mass murder.
So I think the Australian government, from its own standard, has failed. They said that they were doing everything in their power to protect the Australian Jewish community from these sorts of threats, and it didn't happen. So it's clear. It's clear that there's a failure here. And what will the Australian government learn from this? Well, we'll have to wait and see. It's clear the Australian community is outraged, not just the Jewish community, the wider community is outraged. How could this happen on Australian soil? We said always, and it's correct, that October 7th, 2023 was the largest anti-Semitic murder since the Holocaust. So Bondi Beach is the largest act of anti-Semitic murder since October 7th. That's the truth. And it's a very sad day, especially considering that it's Australia. For many people, I remember when I was in Britain as the ambassador and anti-Semitism was rising in Britain. And for British Jews, it was very traumatic because either anti-Semitism was something happened somewhere else, like it happened in Poland or it happened in Romania or in Hungary or Russia. Their grandparents suffered anti-Semitism, or that anti-Semitism was something that happened in crazy countries like Iran, yes, or it might happen in Yemen or in Syria or so forth. The idea that anti-Semitism has been reignited across Western countries is a very, very threatening phenomena. And it challenges, because the whole idea was Jews were supposed to be safe in liberal democracies, yes. But here, if we want to talk about Zionism, Herzl becomes a Zionist because he sees anti-Semitism break out in France following the French Revolution, which promised equality and fraternity and liberty for everybody. Yes, I mixed up the order there. I apologize. And so he said, even in modern liberal societies, this isn't going to work. We need a Jewish homeland. And that's the difference. And I want to maybe finish with this point. You can get very depressed and you can say, some things just don't change. Jew hatred comes and it goes, but it never goes away. And if it goes away, it's only in hibernation, waiting for something to ignite it. And you can say, okay, some things don't change, but something very important has changed. And that is the Jews have changed, and that we have a state of our own, and we can protect ourselves. We're no longer helpless, stateless, defenseless. When my father was born in Magdeburg, Germany, in the early 1930s, the Jews did not have a state. They had to beg people to protect them, beg people to let them in. Israel, with all our faults, and we have faults, and we discuss those faults often on this show, and Israel, with everything that, the challenges we face and the bad people on our borders, the Jewish people have sovereignty. They have reestablished that sovereignty, and we will defend ourselves against our enemies. And if some people find that difficult, well, learn to live with it, because we are not going back to a situation where Jews are just the victims the whole time.
Well, I agree with that. And I'm just saying, though, that we have to assert it more. You're right. Well, look, we were defenseless on October 7th. We were taken by surprise, and we quickly turned that around. But, and we did warn Australia, and we've been warning other countries. And by the way, when you're talking about gun control, at the moment, I understand the sentiment. I've seen this all over social media. Some people saying gun control? No. Jews in other countries, they need to start arming themselves. They should go to synagogue packing heat, because this is not this doesn't seem, this wave of violence on the part of what some people call lone wolves, and in New York, I think Jews need to be armed. That's the way you defend yourself, okay? It's all well and good to do it through talking and voting. And speaking of voting, now we'll end on this note. I'd like to see Jews stop voting for leftist parties that enable the jihadists to lie about Jews in Israel.
So I just respond by saying there have been leaders of the center left who've been good friends of the Jewish people. Tony Blair comes to mind. In Australia, there was a man called Bob Hawke. You've probably never heard the name, but Australians know who I'm talking about. But maybe if we're winding up, we should say something personal on another issue, which is you are now tonight flying to America. Your father passed away overnight. And I'm very impressed with your own internal strength that you came in to do the episode today, Ruthie. Your father was an outstanding public intellectual of the 20th century, Norman Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary magazine. He represented a generation of Jewish intellectuals who changed Jewish intellectual discourse and changed American intellectual discourse and played a long part. I mean, he was in many ways, the most important neocon, a person who started off as a liberal on the left and moved and became one of the most important people behind new conservative thinking in the United States. But for you, it's an intensely personal loss, of course.
No, it is. And thank you very much. And I'll just say, it's interesting. My father, I was just there with him for a few weeks, and now I'm flying, as you say, back because I just got word that he passed away. And it was to be expected. But in any case, it's sad. He's the first person I think of to say, call up and say, and I used to, did up until very recently, to say things like, yeah, what do you think about Albanese? Hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And I'll tell you, he wrote one of his many books was called My Love Affair with America. And it is about the success, how the welcoming of the Jews in America. And sadly, even he said to me, he's never said this his whole life, all he did was champion America. And that, by the way, was part of his conversion to conservatism when all his leftist friends were spelling America with a K. All right. He said, no. America's the greatest country on earth, and he's very grateful. Well, I got to tell you, his watching this what's happening at the universities and all that in America, and seeing swastikas on dorms and people beaten up, Jews beaten up, and all that, and then the election of Mamdani, he said, I don't know, I may have to rethink that, and that is sad.
So, Ruthie, I, and I'm sure all the regular viewers of Israel Undiplomatic, wish you strength. We wish you fortitude. We are with you and with your family. As I said, you're flying out tonight. I believe the funeral is on Friday in New York. If we're not there physically with you, we're with you with our hearts. Until next week.
Thank you so much, Mark.